Hi there, folks. The ambient music you'll hear in this episode was created by Tabletop Audio. And now I'll let our guests introduce themselves.
Hey, I'm the Bear Bard from Bear Bard Tales. I have a channel here that I go over and narrate different, generally horror stories, but all different types of stories from the YouTube verse. I'm also on Dice Goblins. We play some of the other creators in the space. Dead of the Drake, Critical Kunuk, some of the other guys. We're all getting together to play some D&D and have some fun. Other tabletops as well.
Hi, I'm Fred Wheeler. I run the How to D&D YouTube channel, and I do pretty much anything on Dungeons and Dragons or any kind of roleplay game, and that's pretty much me. That's it.
Hi, I'm Jordan. I usually go by Flutes as my pen name, let's say, for my website and my YouTube channel, Flutes Loot, which I do all these things with my wife. We're just a couple of enthusiasts for D&D who started writing and then started doing some YouTube as well. And we just talk about D&D, and sometimes it's about lore, sometimes mechanics, it's just like whatever we feel like.
Thank you again for joining me, guys. So the question I've got for you today is, what is your preparation process for a gaming session as a dungeon master, and how frequently are you able to run sessions? This one's more of a question truly from myself and less for like the, I want to help other people. Maybe it's it'll help perspective thing, but Fred, but so my kind of process is very notes heavy, and I feel like I can always improve that preparation process because of how long things take me. Like, I can DM at most like every other week, like anymore, and I'm like, I don't know how other DMs do a weekly session. But in prepping my games, I think of a lot of world lore. I've got like pages and pages and notes, and when I'm preparing for a session, I think of a session in scenes. I think of like, what are the NPCs in those scenes? What is the goal of the scene? Is there possible information or lore to dispense in these scenes specifically? And these are ideas that come from the oh dear, I've got this book right here. Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, this one. These are kind of philosophies I've gotten from this book. And I've noticed that scenes tend to translate into like roughly an hour worth of gameplay. So it's like, here's a scenario, we're probably going to be here for an hour, another scenario, an hour. But there's just so much preparation. So I'm curious how you guys make your sessions and how often you're able to DM. So Jordan, if you want to go first on that.
Yeah, when I was in college, I was probably DMing like 3 to 4 times a week if I could, but that was because we kind of did it Adventures League style, just me and my friends, where we would just do a lot of one shots because there were so many of us that wanted to play. We all wanted to practice DMing, and it was the easiest way to do it. So there is definitely a different way to plan a one shot from like campaign long-term preparation, right? And one shot's pretty easy because you kind of just plan a bunch of scenes, like you said, and it can be pretty linear. And people kind of have that expectation that it's going to be kind of a more linear adventure session, whatever. Whereas with a campaign, you kind of prepare like a cluster of things that could happen depending on what direction they're going to go in, right? So the way that I usually prepare, and nowadays, I guess I should say, if I do DM, I'm not DMing right now, I'm playing. But when I DM right now, because I have a family and it's just like my time isn't just my own to just stay up late and do whatever with D&D people anymore, I probably only DM twice a week. That was the most recent that I was doing. But they were both Curse of Strahd campaigns. And then one of them actually fractured, so I was actually doing 3 a week for a brief time before one of them ended. But they were all like the same campaign. That made it easier. Whereas if it was like 3 different groups, all with different storylines, I don't know if I could commit to that right now. Well, I know I couldn't. So usually it's like maybe 1 or 2 a week. But the way that I DM is usually I just kind of like mull things over in my head. I'm very improv heavy. I'm not very notes heavy. And so I will kind of like put out some bullet points of like some different locations or like people and like what kind of information they're trying to gain recently. Maybe sprinkle in some like interesting items or different things that I know different players would be interested in. I'm actually really bad to talk about this kind of stuff with because I'm so like loose about how I prepare. Like, you know what I mean? Like some people, like I just published on my website, my friend, his like the way that he DMs is like so intense. He gave like a journal of like all of his preparations, and I'm like, man, all those preparations would be like a page with like 5 bullet points to me, and maybe like some DCs and like what the monsters do, you know, like that kind of stuff. Just very different styles, and so I'm usually not a very good coach if you're like big into like wanting to prepare in detail. That lazy DM thing, I think his thing, I think I heard about him from my brother-in-law or my sister-in-law, and I think I was like, is that me? Am I lazy? Like, that sounds a lot like what I do. I don't know. And so I definitely put in the work, and I'm not just like making stuff up to the point where players can tell I'm just making it up, and it's like not as fun because it's not like I've like hashed out a world. But I don't think you actually need that much preparation, because I think 90% of your game is improvised within whatever framework you've given it. Sometimes when I want something more eloquent, I do use Describe, and I'll go like look up something that just like sounds cool there. And sometimes I just pick a monster and I prepare around that. Like, pick a monster that sounds cool. What am I going to do with that? Build from there. That's generally how I go about things. Oh, and then sometimes if there's like a player I want to focus on, and there's like a story beat from their backstory or something that's like special to them, maybe I'll build around a character for a few sessions, and it's kind of like they get their own little arc that the others are helping out with.
Great. Those are awesome. Also, don't discredit yourself. Like, the point of this question isn't to be like, how can I be better at my notes? And more like, how are the different ways people do prepare for games? Sure, I'm hoping I can steal things, but that's yeah, don't discredit yourself. That's fantastic to hear.
Yeah, I definitely am very comfortable in my way of things. I'm just very I've taught people, like, this happens at work too, where people are like, okay, so what's the method for this? And I was like, I don't know. It always works that way, you know? And so I do that, you know? And so they're always like, but can you give me like a formula? And I'm like, no, not really. Sorry. And so that doesn't always work for everybody, but I'm very comfortable in my way, but it's not always like everybody else's way.
Yeah. And I should also state, there isn't going to be a formula to make this craft perfect. It's just, we can take things from each other, be inspired, try things differently, and hopefully you find the thing that works for you. And I'm still trying to find that thing. So, Alex, the Bear Bard, how is your DM preparation, and what kind of process do you go through?
I saw that. I felt like maybe I'm the wrong person. My first all day. Like, I spent like the first time I DM'd, I spent like the entire freaking day, like trying to prep, do all this stuff. It's tough. You know, I work full time. I have a toddler at home. I live in a very, very small place. And so it's tough while he's awake to do things, to prep or anything like that. So afterwards, you know, the little bit of time I have afterwards, that's, you know, I have to split between, you know, being with my wife since, and then my channel that I'm working on, and then, you know, all this other stuff. So prep time, I don't get as much as I probably should. I try to prep a couple things that, and it depends on where we're at. So like, again, we're running a module right now. And so right now we're in kind of, I kind of expanded chapter 2, which is where things open up and you can kind of do whatever. And so we've kind of been here for a while. So I really haven't done much prep. Yeah, I spend a little bit of time, but because I don't know what they're going to do. They could do anything. There's like, 5 different guild factions that they could be doing quests for, and their own little side things. So it's hard to prep for that one. I'll spend a little bit more time, you know, an hour or two, if it's like getting back to on the story itself, because, you know, you want to make sure that like, okay, let me try to figure this stuff out. And it's like little times in between. Like, I'll try to read ahead in the book, especially in this one where you could have like 4 different outcomes. And so, like, you know, what kind of like little things can I throw in here to give them those hints, because it's all in the same city. But as far as like a number for prep, depending on the week, you know, maybe, you know, I'll try to get at least like an hour of prep, because I try not to be like the worst DM ever. But you know, it really depends on the week and what we're doing. Because, you know, because at first I over prepped, and then they didn't do any of the stuff that I prepped for.
Yeah, definitely over preparing. If you do it, you will find that a lot of it gets thrown out the window. But I guess one of the tricks we as DMs have is if it hasn't been touched, that's actually saved time for later, because you just recycle that material and put it somewhere else.
Exactly. Yeah. And truthfully, like my problem with when I prep, I'll prep all this stuff and then it'll happen. I'm like, wait, what? It'll just blank. So I gotta look at the notes anyway.
And Fred, what is your preparation process like? And I feel like you DM a lot more often than most of us probably do.
That's not true right now. I am not dungeon mastering. I am actually a player. I'm in a group who've been playing for a long time, and we take turns. And it's not my turn to dungeon master. Somebody else is doing that. There was a time when I was running about 4 or 5 games a week. That's suicide. It's not a good idea. Look, my approach to preparing for my games has changed over time, and I've been doing this for a long time. So about, I would say, 20 years, and in various sort of forms. But the first adventure that I would say properly, I learned my lesson. Let's say I learned my lesson about preparing. So I spent a week, 26 pages of notes, running Star Wars Saga, and they got on a spaceship and flew to a different planet. So everything I had prepared for that planet was no longer any good to me, because that was for a sandy planet, and they decided to go to a water planet. Like, you seriously? Like, I can't use anything now. So I don't do that. So what I've done is I tortured myself. I used plot twist cards from Paizo, Game Mastery, and I used story cubes, Rory's story cubes, and I trained myself so that I didn't need to prep if I absolutely was that desperate and I didn't have any time, so that I could just improvise as much as possible. Now, if I do prep, which is pretty rare nowadays, I don't do an awful lot, it probably wouldn't be that much. I just don't have time for a variety of different reasons. I tend to pick pre-made adventures that are about 1 to 4 pages long. I prefer 1 page and a map. That's it. And Wizards of the Coast doesn't make that, by the way, so you're not going to be able to find them in the Wizards of the Coast book, so forget about that. You're going to go and have to see a third-party publisher. Plenty of people capable of doing that. They're out there. So I use that. That's my skeleton, and I build on top of that if I want to, or I have time, or I make stuff up as I go. And then I will often sort of just pick out the key monsters off the internet and put them into a folder. Since we're doing a lot of online games right now, that's probably the easiest way for me. And then I go with, if I'm going to build a monster, then I'll try to sort of build it from an existing monster. I use D&D Beyond usually, just make some quick adjustments. If I'm going to build NPCs, I tend to use like a random name generator, and then the backgrounds for the characters. I use that to build all of my personality traits, ideals, bonds, flaws. That gives me the basics to an NPC. That's pretty easy, and I can roll, or I can just select the ones that I think make sense based on the background that fits the NPC that I'm doing. Drawing maps, I pick real life architecture and ruins, temples, tombs, and I just copy them, making maybe a slight adjustment so that they seem very realistic, because they are, because I stole somebody else's realistic architecture, okay? Then I guess if I'm not going to use a pre-made adventure and I'm going to build my own, I use what Chris Perkins talked about many years ago, 1 page, A4 page, okay, that's it, A4, nothing else. What's going on there? That 1 page is going to have the names of the characters in my adventure, the adventure hook, 5 locations, just the names of them often. There's just what it is. Desert, by a lake, a temple, the name of the temple or whatever it is. So there'll be 5 locations now this might last me 1 or 2 sessions, and then I'll have 5 NPCs. This usually is the patron, the main villain, and 3 other characters that I think will fill out some of the basic roles. One is usually my attempt to make my players laugh. So there's usually there's an oddball in there somewhere, just to mess with them. And I listen to a lot of AJ Pickett when I get a chance while I'm doing other stuff. maybe Mr. Rex, not often really. Sorry, Mr. Rex. And then Dungeon Dad occasionally, but mostly AJ Pickett. It's easy. The internet's all very well, but you got to read things, and if you're doing other things, it's a bit hard. So just listening while you're doing stuff is always much easier to prepare that way. My key approach is watching movies. I pick a movie that's related to the adventure that I plan to run, and then I'm like, I'll probably remember what was in the movie. And yes, I am going to steal everything I possibly can. If it's not bolted down, baby, she's going in. Yes, that does mean players do notice, but sometimes they don't. And it's been my experience that the length of time that you spend preparing does not equate to the quality that the players think your adventure is. I've played long enough to find out that adventures I thought were garbage, where I did almost no preparation, like literally I just showed up from work, panic, what do I do? This is what I'm going to do. And they're like, wow, that was the most amazing adventure. And I'm like, God, these players are really thick, aren't they? They have no idea. So yes, I don't equate the amount of time I spend preparing. I can do that once a week, realistically. I could do it more, but if I did, I'd probably lose my mind. Yeah.
Okay. All these examples are really making me feel better about my own process. And for somebody who started with, I almost improvise all of my games, to here is some very detailed ideas of how to make this work. You had a very wide breadth of help in your in your pitch there, Fred.
Yeah, so that's my notes, mate. Yeah, bullet point. Yes, that could literally be an adventure if you weren't careful.
Yeah, and I mean, there are quite a few people out there who do try specifically to do the one-page adventure. That is specifically a genre thing. And I'll shout out my buddy One Page Mage. You can find him on Twitter. He does all that kind of stuff. If you're looking for a quick adventure, it's ready in there. Does anybody want to add anything before we wrap up here?
I feel a lot better. I see, because sometimes I'll show up. It'll be we play at 9. It'll be 8:30. I'm like, oh snap, I didn't prep. So listening to Fred say that, I feel so much better, because I was ready for him to be like, oh yeah, I spend like 5 hours, every day prepping, and it's amazing. I make this amazing adventure, but I feel a whole lot better. Oh yeah, I just kind of say stuff and it works. I said I'm notorious for forgetting NPC names, because I'll be like, yeah, this guy comes to you. What's his name? Baldus.
Yeah.
It's much worse than that, Alex. Sorry. It's much worse than that, because what has happened on many occasions is I've had a whole bunch of books with little adventures. I've selected the adventure and I've run out of time to actually read through it. Probably would have taken me 5 or 10 minutes, but there literally hasn't even been that much time. I haven't actually prepared anything other than I selected the adventure I'm supposed to prepare. And it's game time. And people start showing up, and I'm like, yeah, but there's at least 15 minutes before everybody's here. And I am going to use that 15 minutes. Don't talk to me, guys. Shut up. And I'm concentrating. Oh, why are you doing this? Oh, nothing. I'm busy right now. Okay, I'm doing my nails. So yeah, I have prepared as they are arriving.
I say my famous line, if I haven't done anything, oh, give me a second, I'm polishing it off. I'm just starting, but I'm polishing it off. We got it, guys. We're good.
Yeah, something at all is the polish. And going to your note there about naming an NPC, one of my recent sessions, I just straight up called a guy Barrel because I couldn't think of anything. So we have Barrel the Goblin.
Sometimes those are the best names though.
Yeah.
I can see I'm terrible with names. I can remember Barrel the Goblin.
And I'm sure my players will, for all the wrong reasons. These are great. Normally I give myself a day before a session and just listen to fantasy music on Spotify to try and stay in the mindset. But there is a lot of great ideas here. And it's apparently not the end of the world if you don't give yourself a day to prep. So find out what works for you guys. You'll find your routine, the way you operate. And thank all you guys for joining me here and for helping me with, I guess a bit of a self-consciousness thing that I've had as a DM. It's always nice talking to other DMs. And everybody out there who's watching this video, be sure to check these guys out. The Bear Bard, How to D&D, and Flutes Loot. Check out their channels, subscribe, and thank you all for being here. This was such a blast. And until next time, may you all play Dicely. Bye.